The judge's gavel struck like a fateful hammer blow, shattering the deathly silence in the courtroom. Guilty. His voice was cold, sharp, slicing through the suffocating air like a blade against flesh. Jake Sullivan, a seasoned cop with 15 years of service under his badge, sat there, his wrists shackled in steel, his gaze locked onto the cold, unforgiving floor. Sweat beaded on his forehead, not because of the sentence, but because of what he was about to lose forever. Somewhere in this room, Luke, his loyal K9 partner, his companion through life and death moments, was waiting. And Jake knew this might be the last time he'd ever see him. The atmosphere was heavy as lead, whispers from the jury slithering through the room like unseen ghosts. Jake had screamed his innocence until his voice was raw, but the evidence, the very things he swore he had never touched, stood against him, arranged with chilling precision, like a grotesque stage play. Someone had betrayed him. And now, they were laughing in the shadows. But as the judge rose to leave, a desperate force surged within Jake. He shot to his feet, chains rattling violently, his voice breaking into a raw, guttural plea. Your Honor! Before they take me away, let me say goodbye to Luke. Just once. The courtroom froze. A ripple of murmurs spread like an unseen tide, and all eyes turned to Jake, not as a convicted man, but as someone pleading to see his only family one last time. The judge hesitated, his towering frame casting a shadow against the wall like a soulless monolith. His eyes narrowed, calculating. A moment passed agonizing, endless. Then, finally, he gave a curt nod. His voice, though firm, carried the faintest tremor of something almost human. 3 minutes. No more. The door at the back swung open, and Luke burst into the room like a gust of wind. His claws scraped against the wooden floor in frantic urgency, his body tense, as if he, too, could feel the weight of impending separation. Jake fell to his knees, his shackles clinking as he pulled Luke into his arms. Tears burned his eyes, unstoppable. I'm sorry, buddy, he choked out, his voice breaking. I let you down. I won't be here anymore. Luke whimpered, pressing his head into Jake's chest, his sharp eyes reflecting a sadness deeper than words could express. But then, suddenly, his body went rigid. His nose twitched. Then again. Then, with a low, warning growl, he started sniffing frantically, his claws scraping against Jake's jacket. His bark erupted, sharp and urgent, shattering the courtroom's eerie stillness. What's the dog doing? The judge's voice wavered, a flicker of unease breaking through his usual authority. Luke didn't stop, he pulled harder, his teeth bared, growling fiercely, a guard dog standing between his master and an unseen threat. A hesitant officer stepped forward, hands trembling as he searched Jake's jacket. The air grew thick, suffocating, as if the entire room held its breath. Then, clink. A small object hit the floor, glinting under the sterile courtroom lights. A recording device. Silence. Every eye locked onto the tiny, insignificant-looking device, now holding the weight of a bombshell revelation. The prosecutor's face drained of color. He lunged forward, his voice cracking, desperate. This means nothing. It's fake. But Luke barked again, standing his ground like an unbreakable shield, refusing to let anyone near Jake. The judge slammed his gavel with a thunderous crack, his voice slicing through the chaos. Pick it up. A trembling officer obeyed, lifting the recorder with unsteady hands. He pressed play. A voice crackled through the static. Cold. Familiar. Just plant the evidence. No one will question it. Sullivan's clean record makes him the perfect fall guy. Jake's heart stopped. He knew that voice. Captain Ray Kessler. His mentor. The man he had trusted more than anyone. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, but Jake stood frozen, his breath shallow, his mind racing. Luke had uncovered the truth. And maybe, just maybe, this nightmare wasn't over yet. The prison cell was as cold as a grave, the dim hallway light casting twisted shadows on the gray concrete walls, dark, contorted figures lurking like demons waiting to strike. Jake Sullivan sat on the hard bench, his hands no longer cuffed, yet still trembling with smoldering rage. The recording device Luke had uncovered had sent shockwaves through the courtroom, forcing the judge to postpone the trial and reopen the case. But in Jake's mind, this wasn't just about proving his innocence. He smelled blood. The stench of betrayal. And he swore he would drag whoever was behind this into the light, no matter the cost. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, sharp and hurried. The iron door swung open, and Sarah Mitchell, Jake's closest ally in the department, stepped inside, her eyes flashing with determination and barely concealed worry. Beside her stood Luke, the K9 with sleek black fur, his ears pricked forward, ready to charge at any threat. "We have work to do," Sarah said, her voice low but sharp as a blade. She tossed a thick file onto the bench beside Jake. The papers spilled out, fluttering like shattered pieces of a deadly secret. "Luke didn't just find that recorder," she continued. "He led me to your locker." Jake frowned, his pulse quickening as he flipped through the documents. The photographs inside were grainy but damning. Captain Ray Kessler, the man Jake had once called boss with unwavering respect, shaking hands with a scarred figure Jake recognized instantly. Tony Viper Marconi. A notorious crime lord. Alongside the photos were financial records, dirty money funneled through hidden accounts, directly linked to the case that had landed Jake behind bars. "He sold me out," Jake growled, his voice a low thunderclap in his chest. "He sold all of us out." Sarah knelt beside Luke, running a hand over his head, but her gaze never left Jake. "It's not just Kessler," she murmured, her voice unsteady as if afraid of the truth in her own words. "These transactions lead to something bigger: cops, politicians, criminals. You were just a pawn. A loose end they needed to silence." Luke lifted his head, sniffing the air, his nose twitching with an invisible scent of danger still lingering in the room. For the next few hours, Jake and Sarah worked in secret, following the leads buried within the files, with Luke as their unwavering guide. They tore through Kessler's old office, searching every drawer, every hidden compartment. Once again, Luke's instincts proved invaluable. He clawed at the corner of a cabinet, paws scratching relentlessly against the wood until a hidden compartment popped open. Inside was a list, names scrawled in red ink. Cops. Politicians. Even a judge. Each name had a number beside it, a price. Some marked as bribes. Others as targets. Jake's blood turned ice cold as his eyes landed on the last entry. Sullivan, eliminate, no loose ends. "Do you see now?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "This isn't just a case. This is an empire built on blood and money." Before Jake could respond, his phone vibrated in his pocket. The screen glowed in the dim cell, displaying a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you won't live to see sunrise." Jake clenched the phone, knuckles turning white. But instead of fear, his eyes burned with unrelenting fire. "They're scared," he murmured, looking up at Sarah. "And I'm going to make them pay." Meanwhile, in the judge's private office, the air was razor-sharp with tension. He sat at his desk, face grim, listening once more to the recording Luke had unearthed. Kessler's voice crackled through the speaker, cold and ruthless. "Sullivan's too clean. He's the perfect scapegoat. The judge slammed his fist against the desk, then barked an order to his assistant. Get Ray Kessler in here. Now. Minutes later, Kessler entered, his crisp suit failing to mask the flicker of panic in his eyes. You called for me, he asked, his voice forced and calm. The judge pushed the recorder forward and pressed play. As his own voice echoed back at him, Kessler's face turned pale as death. Still, he managed a weak, wavering smile. Someone doctored that, he said. I don't. Don't lie to me, the judge roared, rising from his seat. This is evidence, and I will make sure you don't walk away from it. Two officers stepped in, snapping handcuffs onto Kessler's wrists before he could protest. But as they led him away, he turned back, his gaze sharp as a knife. You have no idea what you've just stepped into, he hissed. His warning hung in the air like a curse. Jake walked free on a temporary release order, but he knew the truth was still buried deep in the shadows. Luke trotted beside him, his steady gait a silent promise he would never leave Jake's side. Sarah clutched the file tightly, meeting Jake's gaze with unwavering resolve. We have to keep going, she said. If Kessler was just the tip of the iceberg, the real power is still out there. Jake tightened his grip on Luke's leash, his jaw set like stone. Then we dig, he muttered. Even if I have to burn the whole damn precinct down to find them. But in the darkness, unseen eyes were already watching. And somewhere, deep within the city, the whispers of an even greater conspiracy had begun to stir. The safe house, hidden deep within the forest, looked like a forgotten fortress. Its rotting wooden walls groaned under the biting wind that howled through the trees. Inside, the dim light from an oil lamp flickered, casting shadows over the tense faces of Jake Sullivan and Sarah Mitchell. On the rough wooden table lay the files they had risked everything to retrieve, the final evidence that could bring down the web of corruption. Luke lay at Jake's feet, ears perked, sharp eyes scanning every crack in the window, sensing the darkness tightening around them. Sarah flipped through the pages quickly, her voice trembling with both fear and excitement. If we get this to the press, the whole system will collapse. Kessler was just a puppet, the one pulling the strings is AR, a politician with connections in both the police force and the underworld. Jake nodded, but his gaze remained fixed outside the window, where the darkness seemed alive, shifting, watching. We don't have much time, he muttered, gripping his gun. They know we're here. Suddenly, Luke sprang up, his fur bristling, a deep growl rumbling in his throat like an omen of death. Jake and Sarah exchanged a look. They understood immediately, the enemy had arrived. The sharp sound of shattering glass sliced through the night, followed by heavy footsteps pounding against the wooden floor. The lamp flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Only their rapid breathing and the acrid stench of smoke filled the air. A canister rolled across the floor, spewing thick gas. They're using tear gas, Sarah shouted, clutching the files as her eyes burned. Jake pulled her down, his voice a low growl through the chaos. Luke, stay with me. Sarah, run. The door burst open, and shadowy figures stormed in like hungry wolves. Luke moved first, launching forward like lightning, his powerful jaws clamping down on a man's arm. The attacker screamed in agony, his gun clattering to the ground. Gunfire erupted, each shot lighting up Jake's face, a mixture of fury and unyielding determination. A bullet grazed his shoulder, hot blood soaking through his shirt, but he didn't stop. Sarah, go, he shouted again, holding Luke back as the dog tackled another enemy. Sarah darted toward the back door, clutching the evidence, disappearing into the night. But Jake and Luke didn't run, they fought. The gunfire became a deadly symphony, each enemy falling under the synchronized attacks of the man and his K9 partner. A towering figure wearing a mask lunged at Jake with a gleaming knife. Jake dodged the strike, sending the attacker crashing into the wall. Luke seized the moment. He leaped, fangs sinking deep into the man's throat. Blood sprayed, and the attacker collapsed, lifeless. As the last enemy hit the ground, distant police sirens wailed through the forest. Blue and red lights pierced the misty night. Jake sank to his knees, wrapping his arms around Luke as his blood dripped onto the dog's sleek black fur. "You did good, buddy," he murmured, his voice hoarse. Luke licked his hand, his eyes burning with an undying fire. 3 days later, the entire nation was shaken. Sarah had delivered the evidence to a trusted journalist, and the story exploded across every headline: police corruption network exposed, from officers to high-ranking politicians. AR was unmasked. Arthur Reynolds, a powerful congressman with a fake smile on TV, was now the most wanted criminal in the country. A wave of arrests followed, sweeping up corrupt officers and crime lords alike. Jake Sullivan's name was everywhere, but he didn't care about the fame. Standing on the porch, Jake watched Luke play in the yard, the golden sunset casting a warm glow over his fur. He knelt down, ruffling Luke's ears, his voice steady. "We did it, buddy. It's over." Luke wagged his tail, resting his head against Jake's hand, his eyes reflecting a rare moment of peace after the long battle. To Jake, this wasn't just a personal victory. He had fought for the betrayed, for the silenced voices lost in the darkness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he rose to his feet, his and Luke's shadows stretching into the fading light, a silent promise that they would never bow to injustice. But deep down, Jake knew, the darkness never truly fades. And if it returned, he and Luke would be ready to face it once more.